All right, let's continue along here. Obviously, even Archie, like we read these books and now there's one line in there that goes, if you can see it, you can be it. And he goes, you can be it. And I think about that so often, especially in the context of these young girls, but even grown women and men who, when I would meet them in our time in the Commonwealth, how much it meant to them to be able to see someone who looks like them in this position. And I could never understand how it wouldn't be seen as an added benefit and a reflection of the world today at all times, but especially right now, to go, how inclusive is that you can see someone who looks like you in this family, much less one who's born into it. I mean, there's just no deception in here. She says, I could never understand how it wouldn't be seen as an added benefit. The negative statement is in reference back to the palace. It wouldn't be seen as an added benefit by the palace. So she says she could never understand that. The fact that she says never here is deceptive in that it means she does understand. Why? First off, she does understand it's a race issue. The palace is all white and they fully intend to keep it that way. So she does understand it. But the meaning behind what she's saying here is that I can never understand how it wouldn't be seen as an added benefit. The struggle here, which you're going to see a lot with Prince Harry when we get into his part of the interview, is that it's very clear that the palace is currently living in a world where their own Commonwealth has brown people in it. And so logic dictates you need to represent those people. It's your Commonwealth to maintain this racist mentality at the highest level. It doesn't make logical sense. Meghan Markle can see this. Prince Harry can see this. They're telling the palace itself. They're telling the people there, if you don't represent the people in your own Commonwealth, this is going to be the downfall of the palace. The bottom line here is that nobody actually needs the palace. To be holding on to these antiquated traditions, it doesn't make logical sense. They're going to say, get rid of them because they're literally the institution that is creating all of the problems for the people within their own Commonwealth. That is something that is easily understandable to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and they're trying to explain this to the palace, and they're not understanding why they're not getting it. But they are understanding why they're not getting it. Because when it comes to race, you can't logically explain it away. If a person is racist, they're racist. And they don't care how much logic there is. And if those people are old people, then it's not going to affect them. The downfall of the monarchy is not going to affect them because they will be dead by that time. So logic is not ever going to play a part. They are just not going to change their minds because they're happy with how it is right now. And there's no reason for them to change it. I mean, there is a reason for them to change it, but there's no reason that's good enough for them to change it. Oprah says, you'd said in a podcast that it became almost unsurvivable. And that struck me because it sounds like you were in some kind of mental trouble. What was actually going on? Almost unsurvivable sounds like there was a breaking point within this interview. We are dealing with numerous, enormous problems. We have racism on an institutional level. But then on another level, here we have a question about abuse on a institutional level, which is equally important. There is a bunch of monumentally large problems here. So we're just going to take them one at a time as they come at us. Oprah notices here in something that Meghan Markle says in a podcast that it was almost unsurvivable. And she keys in on that. And she asks a question that is so important here. The reason why I was very openly talking about institutionalized abuse and walking you through the factors before we got to this point is because the reaction that I hear from most people when they get to this point is, oh, poor princess, you became suicidal because what, you had too much money and too much fame? No, the psychological elements that are at work here are insurmountable. It's hard to understand what institutionalized abuse does to a person, but we have plenty of examples of that through history. That's not what this show is about. We're going to stick to this issue at hand. But I wanted you to see this question and think, that is a damn good question, because it is. And to think at this point, no, Meghan Markle is part of the elite. She's part of the problem. She's part of the fairy tale. Then that's not understanding something that some very intelligent people are talking about here. So let's look at this. We've already seen the steps. So hopefully we understand at this point what's really going on here. Unsurvivable. Meghan says, yeah, there was. I just didn't see a solution. Again, negative statement that's in combination with the situation she was in. I didn't really link these together for you before, but a negative statement is not just in reference to the palace, but to an abuser. I didn't want to throw that word around too early before you understood where this was going. But I had noticed that people who are in the throes of depression or abuse use a lot of negative statements. That's something that I'm learning by going through a lot of these statements. So I just didn't see a solution. I would sit up at night and I was just like, I don't understand how all of this is being churned out. And again, I wasn't seeing it, but it's almost worse when you feel it through the expression of my mom or my friends or them calling me crying, just like, Meg, they're not protecting you. And I realized that it was all happening just because I was breathing. And look, I was really ashamed to say that at the time and ashamed to have to admit it to Harry, especially because I know how much loss he's suffered. But I knew that if I didn't say it, that I would do it. And I just didn't. I just didn't want to be alive anymore. And that was a very clear and very real and frightening constant thought. And I remember how he just cradled me. And I went into the institution. That's their medical whatever. And I said that I needed to go somewhere to get help. I said that I've never felt this way before and I need to go somewhere. And I was told that I couldn't, that it wouldn't be good for the institution. It's heartbreaking. It's scary. I'm at a loss here. For one thing, to try and process the emotions that she's going through at this point are difficult. But to also think that this interview is with two people and that Oprah Winfrey at this point has to hear this also and has to keep asking questions. Let's look through this answer, even though there's nothing in here that's deceptive. At this point, we know that the negative statements are because of the situation that she's in and the explanatory statements. So it was all happening just because I was breathing. There's no negative statement here, which means she's not telling you that there was deception about this part coming from the palace, which there isn't. She's telling you about herself here, about her own thoughts. The palace was a problem in that they caused this and they refused to allow her to get help. They wouldn't help her and they wouldn't let her leave to get help. She doesn't say that she asked them for help here. She says that she had already asked them for help and that they said that they couldn't give her help. And then when she asked to leave, she says to go somewhere. And she was told that I couldn't, that it wouldn't be good for the institution. The message that we try to get out to people that are in her situation here is to ask for help, because there are so many people who don't know and they don't understand and they don't ask for help and they end up committing suicide. And we think they just would have asked for help. The problem is that nobody knew. That is not the problem here. The problem here is that everyone knows and no one is willing to help her. She says, my mom, my friends, they were calling me crying, saying, Meg, they're not protecting you. This is the way that she is being blown up in the media by the palace through the tabloids. When your family and friends who are not living with you in the palace, they're calling crying, saying, you're being destroyed here, that creates an element of stress in and of itself. But what we don't want to forget here is what she's already told us, which is that Archie is a mixed race baby, that the palace is terrified of how dark his skin is going to be. And she's thinking the problem is that she's breathing. And this all came about because of a very institutionalized form of coercive control and abuse that psychologically breaks people. Many people end up under the effects of Stockholm syndrome. Now, would that have helped her here? No, absolutely not. Because in the end, Meghan Markle is in a situation here that she can't get out of by herself. And so if she was in a position where Prince Harry was not the man that he is, she would have ended up killing herself. I want to give props to the characters in this story that are the heroes. And Meghan Markle is the one who endured all of the pain and the trauma throughout the story. But Prince Harry is the one who came to that decision point where he was under the effects of Stockholm syndrome. And so he had to break away from the palace in order to save his family. And of course, we all know, spoiler alert, they left. They do get out. I want to show you this. I looked up Chester Bennington. I looked up some famous people who have dealt with depression. I wanted to see if I could find a link between depression and use of negative statements. Because from my standpoint, if I'm looking at a statement and I can tell that somebody is abused or is depressed, then I want to be able to identify that as quickly as possible so that I'm not seeing deception in a place where there isn't deception. So let me read this to you. Chester Bennington, the late lead singer of Linkin Park, was open about his struggles with depression and mental health throughout his life. One of his well-known statements about his battle with depression was made during an interview with Music Choice in February 2017. He says, "I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be depressed. I don't want to have these thoughts, but it's like, that's what it is. I'm just scared of myself sometimes. It's like I can be super happy and everything is great, but no matter what, I can go to bed and wake up the next day and feel like I'm not comfortable in my own skin." So I don't know if you're seeing these as we go through them, but there are a lot of negative statements in here. I'm not comfortable in my own skin. I'm just getting stuck in these thoughts and I just want to get out of my own head. You see a lot of feeling of being trapped and feeling of wanting to escape and a lot of negative statements in a truthful statement. I want to just show you that before we continue here, to show you that Meghan Markle is not alone in this. This is something that you see in people who are suffering from depression. I was able to pull out those negative statements and look at them all together. I figured it out in a different way. But now when I go back and look at other people who suffer from depression, they have similar verbal anomalies. So that's a story for another time. We'll talk more about that later. But we can continue here. I just want to give you some context as to why I'm so certain that she's being honest and truthful through that. Okay, let's let Oprah get to the bottom of this. So the institution is never a person, or is it a series of people? And Meghan says, no, it's a person. It is a person. And Oprah says, it's a person. Meghan says, it's several people. But I went to one of the most senior people just to get help. And that, I share this because there's so many people who are afraid to voice that they need help. And I know personally how hard it is to not just voice it, but when you voice it, to be told no. It makes me sick to read this. Okay, if you have created this institution and there's no way that they don't know what they're doing. I mean, coercive control is not something you do accidentally. They have created this institution. Why not allow her to get help? Meghan Markle is not the first person in the palace who has suffered from depression. And let's not go blaming the people who live in the palace and say, well, depression must be genetic there. It must be something in the water. It's not something in the water. It's institutionalized. So explanatory statement, I share this because there's so many people. That's by itself, which is just an indicator of sensitivity there, and told bad news from the institution. So again, whenever the institution gives her information, it's one way. They have authority over her. And so they told her no. That means it's like your parent telling you no. There's no way around that. Oprah says, who? And Meghan says, and so I went to human resources. So explanatory statement, she's going to human resources. So that makes sense. And I said, I need help because in my old job, there was a union and they would protect me. And I remember this conversation like it was yesterday because they said, my heart goes out to you because I see how bad it is, but there's nothing we can do to protect you. And notice she keeps using the word protect because she keeps using that word. That is the right word for her to explain what she needed. And they are not protecting her. So essentially here, they've told her, we are not going to help you. We can see that this is a terrible situation for you. We can see that you're falling apart, but we are not going to help you because the palace doesn't pay you. And we're not going to let you leave to get help because that would look bad. So suck it up. Wow. I don't want to be alive anymore. And then Meghan says, I thought it would have solved everything for everyone, right? So were you thinking of harming yourself? Were you having suicidal thoughts? And Meghan says, yes, that was very, very clear. And I'm not sure if she's saying that was very clear to herself or if she's saying, yeah, I think I made that very, very clear to you. But it probably is a little bit of both. And Oprah says, wow, very clear and very scary. And, I didn't know who to even turn to in that. And one of the people that I reached out to, who's continued to be a friend and confidant, and one of my husband's mom's best friends, one of Diana's best friends, because it's like, who else could understand that, could understand what's it's actually like on the inside. We have the indicators that we've talked about a million times, but Diana went through a lot of this. So for Meghan Markle and Prince Harry to be reaching out to a friend of Diana's makes a lot of sense here. It is possible that that connection was saved her life. Did you ever think about going to a hospital Or is that possible that you can check yourself in someplace? And Megan says, no, that's what I was asking to do. And Oprah says, yeah. And she says, can't just do that. I couldn't, call an Uber to the palace. She did say a couple of times in here, once she said directly that she was asking to leave the palace and they said no. And then she asked to get help from the palace and they said no. Oprah says, yeah. She says, you couldn't just go. You have to understand as well, when I joined the family, that was the last time until we came here that I saw my passport, my driver's license, my keys, all that gets turned over. At this point, there's no actual plausible deniability left for the palace. This is not something that they accidentally did. There's a process of abuse here that is systematic. It's institutionalized. It starts when they promise you protection, and then you get trashed in the media. Your family gets trashed in the media. You realize that they promise protection, they don't provide it. And then eventually you realize, oh, actually the tabloids don't even care if you're half Black or if you're American or all of this stuff. They're being fed these stories from your captor. And if captor is the wrong word, let's see. They took her passport, her driver's license, and her keys. And if she wants to leave, she has to ask so that somebody can take her somewhere. I'm at a loss for words here, but the bottom line is that this is purposeful. It's done with intent. Well, the way you're describing this, it's like you were trapped and couldn't get help, even though you're on the verge of suicide. That's what you're describing. That's what I'm hearing. And Megan says, yes. I'm not making fun of her question. She's asking it in a naive way, like she's just realizing all of this, when clearly she has known this for quite a while because she was referencing the podcast. So she has known this. What she's doing is she's trying to be relatable to the public. She's trying to allow the people watching this to be able to relate, which is very difficult because Oprah is not in a situation that I am here to explain to you. All she can do is ask questions. Then she says, and that would be an accurate interpretation, yes. And Meghan Markle says, that's the truth. Oprah, that's the truth. At this point, she doesn't really know what to say. She has to come up with the questions on the spot. And honestly, I wouldn't know where to go from that. But Oprah clearly is having difficulty coming up with the question. So Meghan helps her out here, says, and if you think about, it was one of the things that it still haunts me is this photograph that someone had sent me. We had to go to an official event. We had to go to this event at the Royal Albert Hall. And a friend said, I know you don't look at pictures, but oh my God, you guys look so great, and sent it to me. And I zoomed in, and what I saw was the truth of what that moment was, because right before we had to leave for that. So subconsciously, she's telling you she was under duress at that point. Right before I had to leave for that, I had just had that conversation with Harry that morning. And it was the next day that I talked to the institution. So now we get some timeline perspective here. The day of that event is the day that she had told Harry that she is trying to not commit suicide at this point, that she knows that that's where she's headed. She's already had very clear thoughts. When she says clear, she's saying that she's no longer debating in her mind. It's no longer hazy. She's making plans, and the plans are already very clear. So everything's laid out. And at this point, all she can do is try to hang on. And then she says she went to the institution the next day. And that was when they told her no. So the day she told Harry was January 16th. I looked this up, of 2019. This was about 6 weeks after they returned from their Australia tour. So remember when she talked about the Australia tour, she came back, and that was when she announced to the world that she was pregnant. That's when she said everything changed. That's when the tabloids absolutely were crushing her. I mean, when the tabloids were destroying her with information that they were being fed by the palace about the avocados and about touching your baby bump. And so this is a mere 6 weeks later, which makes sense because if you're going through this downward spiral, it happens relatively quickly. Then we have more explanatory statements due to the palace being involved. Leave means conflict. She was truly under distress at this time. And so Oprah, you had the conversation, I don't want to be alive anymore. And she says, yes. That's the conversation that she had with Harry. No, it wasn't even, I don't want to. And then Meghan says, it was like, these are the thoughts that I'm having in the middle of the night that are very clear. She's saying, it's not even, I don't want to. Remember the original question here, Oprah's asking, you had the conversation, I don't want to be alive anymore? And she says, yeah. And then she said, well, it's not that I don't want to be alive anymore. It was like, these are the thoughts that I'm having in the middle of the night that are very clear. So she's not saying she doesn't want to be alive. She's saying that she wants to be dead. And then Oprah says, yes, clarification. Megan says, and I'm scared because this is very real. This isn't some abstract idea. This is methodical. And this is not who I am. But we had to go to this event. And I remember him saying, I don't think you can go. And I said, I can't be left alone. Meghan Markle's level of self-awareness here is admirable. For someone in her position to grab on to the one thing that she knows is her only chance to stay alive here and to not let go, it's admirable. That level of strength and self-awareness, Oprah, because you were afraid of what you might do to yourself. Megan's like, yeah, I answered that question. And she says, and we went and that, and then Oprah says, I'm sorry to hear that. Oprah is sort of interjecting thoughts here. They aren't really being processed because Megan is telling a story here. And that picture, if you zoom in, what I see is how tightly his knuckles are gripped around mine. You can see the whites of our knuckles because we are smiling and doing our job, but we're both just trying to hold on. And every time that those lights went down in that royal box, I was just weeping and he was gripping my hand. Notice the only explanatory statement here is we were doing our job. So it's directly related back to over-explaining when she's talking about the abuser. And Oprah says, wow. And then it was, okay, intermission's coming. The lights are about to come on. Everyone's looking at us again. And you have to just be on again. And that's, I think, so important for people to remember is that you have no idea what's going on for someone behind closed doors. You have no idea. Even the people that smile the biggest smiles and shine the brightest lights, it seems to have compassion for what's actually potentially going on. So there's nothing not truthful in this. Oprah, I know the public is looking at you, and to think that you earlier in the day had said to Harry that you didn't want to be alive anymore. Yeah, and just hours before, just sitting on the steps in our cottage, just sitting there and then going, okay, well, go upstairs and put your makeup bag in your sink and try to pull yourself together. The job just won't relent. Oprah says, you've said some pretty shocking things here, revealing. And Meghan Markle says, I wasn't planning to say anything shocking. I'm just telling you what's happened. I'm sorry if it's shocked you. It's been a lot. Okay. And again, you get some empathy here from her. I'm sorry if it shocked you. And Oprah says, how do you feel about the palace hearing you speak your truth today? Are you afraid of a backlash or their reaction? She says, I think I'm not going to live my life in fear. I think so much of it is said with an understanding of just truth. But I think to answer your question, I don't know how they could expect that after all of this time, we wouldn't still just be silent if there was an active role that the firm is playing in perpetuating falsehoods about us. All right. So it takes her a second to get to the point here, which is that they are still under attack by the firm. There is still negative press being put out about them by the firm, even though they don't live there anymore. So this comes right after the after, which means how could they expect that after all of this time, so there's missing time here, we would still remain silent if there's an active role that the firm is playing in perpetuating falsehood. So this is what's here. This is the missing time here. Basically, this boils down to is that they've left and they're trying to move on with their lives. And the palace is still relentless. It's still creating this narrative of her. And you see that here. It's perpetuating falsehoods about us that at a certain point you're going to go, but you guys, someone just tell the truth. And if that comes with risk of losing things, I've lost. There's a lot that's been lost already. And I grieve a lot. I've lost my father. I lost a baby. I nearly lost my name. There's the loss of identity, but I'm still standing. And I hope for people in the takeaway from this is to know that there's another side, to know that life is worth living. And so to answer Oprah's question here, is she afraid of backlash? There's two answers to this. Number one, they haven't stopped. There's no backlash because they are non-relenting in the negative press. So if they were going to get negative press anyways, it was just going to be about something else. So there's no real backlash, so to speak, that changes anything from their everyday life. But in the end, she's telling you she has already lost everything. And at the same time, she hasn't lost herself. That's the one thing that they can't take away from her. So losing title, losing the money, losing the support, losing all of the good things, what she's really losing is all of the bad things. All of the good things that came from that is not a reason why you would be afraid to tell the truth. And then she also says she lost her father and she lost a baby. I had to look that up as well. She lost her baby in July of 2020, which was about a year and a half after that conversation that she had with Prince Harry. And so luckily she was already on the path to getting better before this happened. And she already had a support group and she was already away from the abuse. And so that's why she was able to deal with this. And then she says she lost her father. And I looked that up and she became estranged from her father. Her father is still alive, I believe, but she lost their relationship when she left in 2018, basically the incidences that surrounded the wedding. She's basically saying that there's nothing that the palace can take away. They never offered anything to begin with. So, and nothing about their daily life is changing. All right, we're about to bring Harry into this. So this is a good place for us to end right here.